Hey, welcome to Sunday Live Spiritual Direction and Soul Care. Every Sunday, 2 p.m. So glad that you can be with us again today as we hang out together. Again, it is a beautiful, bright, cold day here where I am. The sun is shining, the sky is blue, uh, the snow looks like diamonds glistening in the sun. It's an awesome day. How are things by you? So glad that you're with us, whether you're watching on the broadcast or the replay. And I'm really excited about what we're going to be diving into today as we talk about the 5 levels of compassion. The 5 levels of compassion. Uh, it's a interesting thing to explore, and it's really inspired by a teacher who really inspires me, named Gaber Mate. And I really want to share this with you because I found it to be incredible for my own spiritual journey. It's an incredible framework that kind of like goes deeper or goes higher, depending on how you want to talk about it. It helps us understand uh, the movement of compassion and the power of compassion and the different layers of compassion that we're being invited to always as we grow and as we learn to offer compassion to others and especially to ourselves. And I think like one of the most powerful things that we can do is learn to offer compassion to ourselves. Um, it's something that I've been really journeying in and growing in myself the last couple years now. Um, it's amazing how like really painful, unwanted things can either force you into a corner and leave you hurting in pain and feeling stuck, or those things can push you to grow, can push you to face reality and accept reality and grow through reality. And it's awesome. One of my favorite thinkers is a 13th century thinker who says you can call God perfection, you can call God love, but one of the best things to call God is compassion. And in the tradition that I grew up in the Christian tradition, of course, Jesus, our teacher and leader, is the picture of compassion, is the template for compassion. And we see compassion being, really lifted up in almost every major religious tradition, emphasizes the value and beauty and power of compassion. So there's some deep wisdom here for us, regardless of what your vocabulary is, regardless of what your religious or spiritual vocabulary is, or no spiritual or no religious vocabulary at all. There's something deeply, profoundly real and important here for us about compassion. And so I'm really excited to dive into it and talk about the 5 levels of compassion. Mark Renane says it's cold as crap where he is. Yes, it's very cold here as well. Very cold, very cold. But here, like I said, it is blue skies and bright. And that definitely takes the edge off for me, at least. So I am drinking Dr. Pepper today, not hot cocoa with some grown up additions, just Dr. Pepper. Wet my whistle a little bit before we get into this here. Um, like I had said, compassion, when we think about compassion, what do you think of when you think of compassion? What is compassion for you? Where do you most see it? Where do you most see it? Or what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of compassion? Maybe it's a memory of compassion. I don't know. What does compassion mean to you? How have you experienced compassion? Just want to invite you as I'm talking about it and asking you, just bring kind awareness to yourself. And how do you feel when you hear the word compassion? Say it's like it's not just starting with concepts in our minds. Let's pay attention to how our whole selves, our bodies respond to this idea of compassion, right? Bring kind awareness to you hear the word compassion. How does your body respond? Maybe it's in your gut, maybe it's in your heart, maybe it's in your shoulders. I don't know. How do you respond to this? Just bring kind awareness to it. And what are the emotions that you attach to those feelings about compassion? Maybe you feel a deep sense of longing when you think about compassion, when you hear the word compassion. Jill says compassion is to care for someone. Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe you feel frustration when you think about compassion because you think about where you need compassion and you're not getting it, or you need understanding and you're not getting any, right? Jill says that she can breathe easier when she thinks of compassion. Maybe the concept of compassion elicits deep peace for you, like it does for Jill. Hmm. I'm going to make sure that we have the chat overlay on because you guys are giving me some good comments. So I am going to throw this here as well. And then that way we can see your comments as they come. All right. Compassion. Mark says, this is a heavy season thinking about my mom. So I think about here. Okay. Think about here, right? Yes. Some of us are coming up on the 1 year anniversary of some pretty big losses. Um, so when I hear the word compassion, I definitely get that sense of longing and also a sense of frustration, right? Um, about, but not about what I'm not getting, the compassion I'm not getting, but about my own issues of kind of like performance issues, as far as like, why can't I, needing to have compassion for myself? Why can't I be more compassionate for myself? You know, that's what I start thinking about, right? So just bring kind awareness to these things. What do you think of? What do you feel? How do you feel? Where do you feel it? Bring kind awareness to the stories you tell yourself about compassion, right? I don't know. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. We all have stories that we tell. What is compassion? Why does compassion matter? What we want. So, let's just kind of get in that self-aware space as we think about compassion. And then let's talk about the 5 levels of compassion. 5 levels of compassion. Okay. So ultimately, compassion literally means to suffer with someone, right? Passion. Passion means suffering. Means with, passion, to suffer with, like the passion of the Christ. When we think of the suffering and death of Jesus, we call that the passion of Christ. Coming up here after Lent in April, we will have Holy Week, and it's sometimes called Passion Week or Passion Sunday is the Sunday before Easter, right? Some people, another example is, you see, a child suffer, right? You feel bad, right? I remember when I was living in Omaha, I was walking through downtown Omaha, and there was a bird that the downtown area has these kind of like covered sidewalks in this old market, kind of old school brick street warehouse district, and it has these covered sidewalks. And there was this bird that suddenly fluttered down from one of the covers and was just sitting on the sidewalk and couldn't really take off anymore. It was just the bird was old, and um, the bird was old, so it was probably going to die, right? And I remember feeling terrible for the bird, just being overwhelmed with feeling terrible for this bird, right? And there was an older gentleman who ran the local bookstore in the district, and I was like, "Oh, look at the bird," and he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "What should we do? What can we do?" And he's like what?" Like, what do you like, we should do what? Like, there's nothing you can do. The bird is dying. Like, that's what happens, right? But that's that compassion, right? That you feel bad when you see another being suffer, right? Not just people, but animals, whatever, right? And compassion's always there, right? It's always there. The thing about compassion too, though, is that it can be blocked, right? It can be blocked, and we can talk about that a little bit as well, a little bit. But it all comes down to, someone is suffering, and I wish they weren't, because it hurts me to see them suffering, right? Someone is suffering, and I wish they weren't, and that hurts me to see them suffering. And that's what I would call ordinary. That first level of compassion is human compassion, ordinary human compassion. And we don't mean ordinary by uh, less important or less valuable. We just mean the compassion that is within the human self, right? We are compassionate beings by nature. We are driven toward compassion. And where we see that become deficient is when something has happened to us to alter or mar or disfigure our natural tendency and our natural ability to be compassionate. Okay. So ordinary compassion. And I think when you look at the stories of Jesus, this is where Jesus helps us realize that uh, Jesus comes to show us how to be human, because Jesus is full of compassion. There's story after story after story of him being moved with compassion. Those words are used. He sees people, they're lost, they're feeling terrible about themselves. They don't have any direction in their life, and he's moved with compassion. He comes to the gates of a city, and there's a widow there, and her son has just died, and that means that she has no one to take care of her now in that culture. And so it says that he's moved with compassion. When his best friend dies and his sisters are upset, it says that Jesus weeps for him, right? So like Jesus is the ultimate picture of our deep humanity in this area, right? It's not divine in some sense of otherworldly to be fully human and to be full of compassion. That's by grace, is the way that we are hardwired to be as human beings. We're hardwired for connection, and compassion is what happens out of that natural connection that we try to live in and maintain and connect with, right? And all our problems, many of our problems, many of our relational breakdown, much of our relational breakdown, our mental health issues, all those things happen when we get disconnected from what we truly are and what Jesus demonstrates for us as human beings together, right? And so when we get disconnected from that and each other, that's when compassion starts to break down. It's a denial of our true selves. See, it's a denial of this beautiful power that is within us, this natural thing that we're made for. That's what ordinary compassion is. I see someone suffering and I feel bad. And I don't want them to suffer, right? Um, that's ordinary compassion. That's the first level of compassion. Okay. But then we have the next level, which I would call, or some have called, the compassion of curiosity, the compassion of understanding, right? Compassion of curiosity, or the compassion of understanding. So, what this is really about is if we see people suffering, right? Um, we eventually push past that initial ordinary compassion of just feeling bad, right? I feel bad for someone else. I don't want them to suffer. And we eventually start asking why? Why? We become invested and more connected to their suffering. We choose to step deeper into it. Why? Why are they suffering? Right? Why are they suffering? And usually with certain kinds of suffering, we make judgments, right? We make judgments or we make assumptions, but we don't inquire. certain kinds of suffering because of the way we're trained to think because of our family upbringing, our religious assumptions, the air we breathe around our culture. Like you've heard me say before, I think American culture is incredibly obsessed with punishment and blame. It's a very punitive culture. Um, and so we see certain kinds of suffering because of the stories we've been told. Remember when I asked, what are the stories you've been told about compassion? We see certain kinds of suffering or certain kinds of difficulty in people's lives, and we just make judgments and assumptions, and we don't start asking questions. We don't inquire about why, what it is, because we've been fed a story about the idea that there's certain kinds of suffering that people deserve. And that's really dark, really, when you think about it, right? And it dehumanizes not only the person who's suffering, but we really dehumanize ourselves and we don't demonstrate curiosity and understanding why. Why are they suffering? What's happened? What's really going on for this person, right? What are the things that what are the stories they believed? What are the things that were done to them, right? What's the cumulated effect of certain choices that they believed that they had to make, right? That got them where they are. What happened? What's going on? See, this is a deeper level of compassion because we're starting to get invested. We're starting to be curious, not just see the surface issues, but it's an acknowledgement that we're all so much deeper than and we're more than whatever we see in this moment or experience in this moment. So what's really going on, right? That's the compassion of curiosity, the compassion of understanding. And so from there, um, from there, we can move into the compassion of recognition, the compassion of recognition. And this is, how do we say this? This is the compassion that rises from just the practice of life, you know? Gabriel Mate says that the truth is that there's nothing about anybody else that isn't in me as well. There's nothing about anybody else that isn't in me as well. So, no matter how obvious the differences there might be between me and someone else, or you and someone else, between us and others, we can be honest about the fact that uh, we all have that kind of uh, open space, that empty space, that kind of hungry ghost within us that always kind of wants to be fed from the outside at all times, right? That's all of us in our own ways. That's really what addiction really is, right? Is when we want to be fed from the outside of us all the time, right? Some people do it with obvious addictive substances or behaviors, but we may do it. We may feed it by pouring ourselves into our work or our shopping habits. You know, there's a reason why uh, your your Instagram account is called your feed, right? It's a feed. And maybe that need to go through, right, might for you be you trying to feed the hungry ghost of seeing, of comparison, your addiction to comparison, right? Seeing what everyone else is doing so that you can benchmark based on what everyone else does and everyone else says and what everyone else wears and what everyone else thinks, right? And then you totally give away your sense of self to others, right? And then you feel terrible because that's always a dead end because nobody else can hold your sense of self for you. You can't give that away, right? Whatever it is, right? It's the compassion of recognizing ourselves in each other, right? The differences between us and others are always obvious, but it's our similarities that are fascinating, right? So no matter how much we don't want to admit it, we're all just like the rest of us. We're all just like the rest of us. So that's why this is called the compassion of recognition. There's nothing about anybody else that isn't already in me as well. And so this is where we start to learn to let go of judgment. This is why this level of compassion, man, you could spend your whole life living here, just reminding yourself, holding yourself to this, right? Because this not having this level of compassion, not living and accepting and really trafficking in this kind of compassion means that we're always going to be feeding the energy. We're always going to be fueling that judgment making impulse in us, right? And nobody wants to be around that, but it also it makes us fearful, it makes us angry, it makes us resentful about ourselves, because ultimately that judgmental move is non-compassion. Always judgmentalism is being judgmental is always a sign of non-compassion, and it always ultimately ends up getting turned on us, if not starts with ourselves. So we do this to ourselves, like, and do you really want to live like that, right? Like, is it really so painful to admit that the person down the road that you just are so sure you're better than, or that you don't want anyone to ever think you're even possibly like, is it so painful to admit that we're all really a lot more alike than we want to admit? Is that so much more painful than the constant state, that brief moment of recognition, and then the letting go of judgments, right? The humility of that, right? Is it really worth avoiding that temporary pain of recognition for living a life of, like, under the pressure of resentment and fear and anger about ourselves with ourselves? I mean, talk about like a mind screw, right? It's like, this is where we learn to let go, like, just let go of judgment, right? We're all in the same boat, and we're all just like the rest of us. Compassion of recognition. So tell me what you think. We've got three things we've said. We've said ordinary human compassion. We've talked about ordinary human compassion. We've talked about the compassion of curiosity and seeking understanding. And we talked about the compassion of recognition. What do you think? Just put some comments in the chat if you want. What's standing out to you? What's making you, of these three levels so far, what's making you go, huh, that's the one I really need to work on? Shannon says, hi. Hi, Shannon. It's good to have you here. So glad to have you on the call today. It's awesome. See your face come up there. So just be thinking about that: human compassion, curiosity and understanding, compassion and recognition. And now let's talk about level 4, right? The compassion of what I call reality. The compassion of reality. Some people would say it's the compassion of truth, you know, the compassion of truth. But I like to say compassion of reality. Mark says, I've never thought of compassion as the enemy of comparison. Yes. Yes. Instead of like fighting against comparison, right? Instead of fighting against it, like, offer compassion to it, right? Because the more we resist comparison by saying, don't do that, and I should, you know what I mean? The more we strengthen its energy to compare, right? Give yourself a positive um, pathway of energy. Offer compassion to yourself because you're comparing. Offer compassion to yourself, um, right? So, the compassion of reality, or the compassion of truth, right? Um, uh, we kind of operate underneath an assumption, right? That it's always compassionate to protect people from pain. It's always compassionate to protect people from pain. Well, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, is it always compassionate to protect people from avoidable pain? Yes. Yes. Avoidable pain, unnecessary pain? Yes. That is always a good thing to do. But it's not compassionate to avoid reality, right? It's not compassionate to say to someone, hey, just fill your day with social media scrolling and compulsive shopping so that you can avoid the devastating loss that you experienced this past year, right? So you don't have to face the grief that we all know is already there, right? That's what I'm talking about, right? That's what I'm always talking about. It's like the compassion of reality is is the compassion that names reality and enters into reality and keeps company with reality, and without judgment lets people be sad when they're sad, right? Lets ourselves grieve when we're grieving. And when we're tired of grieving and tired of being sad, which is something that I've said to close people to me over the last year, I'm just tired of being sad all the time, right? Part of the compassion of reality, the compassion of truth, is just letting me be where I am, right? That I'm sad and I'm tired of being sad, right? Right. Not pushing us to deny those things, right? The reason why I like the say the compassion of reality and not the compassion of truth is because the word truth gets used as like a weapon, you know? This isn't about getting someone across the table from you to agree with your assessment of reality, right? This isn't about getting the people around you to say and do the things that you want them to say and do, right? It's not about violating people's autonomy to be who they are, right? And to be who they are and the right that we all have to be who we are, free of a fear of retaliation or marginalization or whatever, right? This is about the compassion of truth, of reality that journeys with people to face what is already clearly in them, right? Is theirs, right? Not yours to tell someone else about who they are and what they should be or whatever. This is about journeying with, this is hard work of compassion, right? It's a permission giving compassion that uh, doesn't accept apologies when someone vents and then they say, "I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have vented." It's like, no, that's the truth. That's the reality of where you are, right? It requires us to be not threatened by other people's feelings and thoughts and emotions, right? And um, and to attend to how we feel like we often are inconvenienced by other people's feelings and emotions, right? You've heard me say this before. It's like when someone's grieving and then after someone dies and they say, "Man, they're doing so well." They're doing so well. And what 9 times out of 10 that means is I'm just so thankful that they're not acting like anybody died. They're acting like nobody died, even though somebody died, because their continuous grief and loss is I don't know what to do. And so it's awkward for me or makes me uncomfortable, right? Say, do you see how this compassion of recognition in the last level, right, is so key because we let go of these judgments about ourselves and others. But this is what it breaks us open to is the compassion of truth is about actually operationalizing actual acceptance of people, right? Actual acceptance of what is where they are, right? Howard Thurman says that the essence of um, love is that we meet people where they are, as they are, and treat them there as if they're already where they should be, right? We just simply accept. We just simply accept. And we invite people into accepting themselves, right? The compassion of recognition is accepting that we're no different than everyone else around us. The compassion of reality is being a companion and a support to others so that that helps the beloved across from us accept themselves, right? To accept the reality of where we are. And then finally, we see the compassion of possibility, the compassion of possibility. Okay. So when you see a suffering person, do you only see their suffering and dysfunction, right? To this, in this space? Do you only see that? And like when we only see someone's dysfunction, what we're seeing is their response to their own suffering, right? That's their own response to their own suffering. That's what dysfunction is, right? That's what spiritual bypassing is, right? Where we use our spiritual language, our religious language to avoid doing our actual inner work, right? um, when we see people medicate or numb or all the avoiding coping techniques or whatever it is, or they're lashing out or whatever, right? When we see someone suffering, do we only see their suffering? Do we only see them in their suffering and their dysfunction, which is their response to their suffering? Or do you still hold on to a vision of the perfection they are underneath all of that? Do you hold on to seeing their true self? So this is where, again, this kind of compassion is helping us move out toward companioning with, walking alongside, loving people, right? Because compassion is really love in action, right? We need this level of compassion. We need to cultivate our ability to see the perfection underneath each other's suffering, underneath each other's foibles, underneath each other's quirks. And that doesn't mean that that's a free pass, right? Like if are annoying, please work on not being annoying to people. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You know, but like we all need to keep sight of the perfection that's underneath all of it, right? That there's this true self for all of us beneath whatever we're dealing with, right? And the reason why we need this layer of compassion, this level of compassion, the reason why we walk in this level of compassion is because people can't see themselves without a mirror. We can't see ourselves without a mirror. And so that mirror is each other. See, that mirror is each other. And yes, we can talk about like, your mirror is flawed, just like my mirror is flawed. And so sometimes we reflect back things that are not really about the person, but are about us and our own insecurities and what we need that other person to be, or how we need that person to act or whatever. And you've got to do your self-compassion work to let go of trying to control and shape other people and all of that, right? But bottom line is we're hardwired for this connection with each other, and we can't see ourselves. We can't get sight of that true perfection, that true self that is underneath our dysfunctions and our suffering without each other, without the mirror of other human beings being there to say, hey, remember you, remember the true self that is you, remember you, right? If we present with pain and all we do is out of compassion, right, mirror someone's own view of themselves, right? If I present to you all my suffering and my dysfunction, and all you do is mirror back these things that I'm presenting to you are fundamentally my own view of myself, right? And if all you do is just simply mirror that back, then we aren't actually helping. We aren't actually helping. But in the fifth level of compassion, we have the opportunity to mirror back their possibilities, right? Now, and this isn't about toxic positivity. It's like, no, everything's okay, but it's not, But this is about mirroring back their possibilities. And it's not in the future. Those possibilities are right here in the present, right? It's to help them get to see themselves differently, to help them see themselves differently, to not lose sight of the beautiful reality of what each of us is that's sitting across from us, right? I mean, this is really the promise of in the Christian faith, this is really what the promise of grace is, right? This is what the promise of grace and forgiveness and mercy is, right? This is what is professed to be believed. And it's rooted in the Jewish tradition, right? That the Hebrew faith, the Jewish tradition, was revolutionary in the sense that like you can be walking along the path of life and you can run off spectacularly, lose your way and run off the path of life into the weeds, into a ditch. And you simply, all you have to do is get up and get back on the road and you'll be okay. And everyone who's on the road has a responsibility to help you get back on the road, right? So you can keep walking the path of life, right? And the beauty of how simple and straightforward that all is it's designed to free us all from judgment from ourselves and others and to live fully in these 5 levels of compassion together, right? It's not a system that says you can fall spectacularly into the ditch and we'll all be on the road to help pull you out of the ditch, so long as you make sure that we get to stand on the road above you and point out all the reasons why you're in the ditch and how you're dumb and wrong and bad and blah, blah, blah. And then once we are clear with you and feel like you really get it, then we'll throw a rope in to help you get out of the ditch. No, no. That's not it. It's, oh, we're all walking along and we can all fall in the ditch. Everybody is ditch has a ditch attraction. We all tend to get distracted and lose our way. And so we just pull each other back in. And when we realize, and when we're brought to our senses, when we realize because of the compassion of others about our possibilities, we go, oh yeah, I want to get back on that road. And we all go, great, you're back. Let's keep moving on. Right. So that's really the essence of what grace is meant to be, right? That's how simple and straightforward it is. It's calling us into these 5 levels of compassion where we are these mirrors for each other, where we're constantly holding forth the possibility of what we are always underneath whatever our failings are, right? And it frees all of us from judging or needing to understand or being offended or, it like when you see this, right, it becomes so much easier to just kind of let people be who they are when, you've done the compassion of recognition and you're walking in the compassion of reality, of accepting your own self, right? Like when you have not done this recognition work and compassion, and when you've not then practiced the realities of the compassion of reality, of accepting who we are as and accepting others as they are, right? Then we can't get into the compassion of possibility because we're still so shut down on ourselves. See, you know, if you can't let go of that thing, right, about somebody else, right, it's not necessarily because what they did is so bad. It's because you haven't been able to offer compassion to yourself, especially the compassion of recognition and the compassion of reality about your own challenges, right? It's not that you're doing something wrong, it's that you need to offer yourself more compassion for yourself. So that's the 5 levels of compassion. 5 levels of compassion. We have basic, ordinary human compassion, which is pretty remarkable. It's where we're hardwired, right? We feel bad when we see someone else suffering. Compassion of curiosity and understanding, where we push deeper and we start getting invested and we say, why? Why is this person suffering? What's going on with this person? What's the story here? The compassion of recognition that no matter how bad it is in front of you, right? No matter how bad or how stupid or how unwise or how terrible the choices are of the person in front of you who's suffering in front of you, right? That we're all just like the rest of us. We're all just like the rest of us. Compassion of reality, of truth, where we come to terms with ourselves, not tell other people to come to terms with themselves. We ruthlessly look inward and and come to terms with ourselves and offer ourselves compassion about where we are, right? And then finally, the compassion of possibility. This is where we offer and mirror to each other that beyond wherever each one of us individually is, we are all so much more. And not someday, but even right now, in the midst of the suffering, right now, you are so much more, right? So this is the 5 levels of compassion. 5 levels of compassion. Now, we live in a time, as I wrap up, we live in a time where we're being asked to offer compassion more and more and more, and it's hard. We're going into the 3rd year of a pandemic. It's completely unnecessary too. We shouldn't be here. If we could have gotten ourselves together, especially in this country, we wouldn't still be living with the things that we're having to live with, but we can't seem to like care about each other enough around here in this country. So we're being asked to have compassion, and it's really hard to have compassion, especially for people who, if you feel like they're endangering you, you know? And so it reminds us of how oftentimes there are problems that aren't fixable, you know? And so we feel like we're faced with the predicament of trying to solve the unsolvable, right? And that's a real source of distress to all of us, right? And it's that weight of trying to fix something that is unfixable or manage things that feel unmanageable. That's what's stressing everybody out, right? That's what's stressing us all out. And we start to hear the phrase compassion fatigue, right? Like some of you probably heard all this and you're like, this is all good and great, Nathan, but like I'm tired of compassion. I just want people to like get vaxxed and stay home if they need to, and I want the government to send us more stimulus checks, and we just need to get this fixed, right? You know what I mean? Like, don't tell me to be kind or compassionate, right? You know what I mean? I have compassion fatigue, you know? But this is the thing, and I was just challenged with this in this past week, and I think I'm starting to believe this, is that we talk about compassion fatigue, but there's probably really no such thing as compassion fatigue. Because compassion is ordinary human compassion. Compassion is part of our nature. No one just gets tired of being compassionate. We don't get tired of being ourselves as humans. You know, maybe what we're calling compassion fatigue is because we're actually getting tired of not being ourselves. Right? Of not being ourselves. The problem isn't with compassion directed toward other people. Uh, the issue is the lack of compassion for ourselves, right? Our need, our seeming drive to resist the compassion of reality about who we really are, right? I'm not saying don't do self-care and, fill up and do the things that energize you. I'm not saying don't do any of those things, right? But I just don't know if when we have what we call compassion fatigue, it's because it's possible uh, that it's wrong to ever have compassion toward someone else, as if uh, we should put a cap on it and only dose out compassion in sustainable ways. No, I think I think you have a sacred, holy, infinite well of compassion within yourself. Compassion is part of who you are, and we don't get tired of being ourselves. Right? But it can be very tiresome to not be yourself, to not be allowed to be fully who you are, to show compassion and love and kindness. Um, you know, especially in a culture that sometimes rolls their eyes at it or makes fun of tenderness or kindness, right? Something to think about as we think about these levels of compassion. When you feel, maybe do an experiment this week. Like when you start to feel what you've been told is compassion fatigue, maybe push pause and ask yourself, is this really because I can't care about someone else? Or is this because there's somewhere that I'm not showing enough compassion for my own self? Where am I holding myself back from being fully myself, fully the self that God has designed and created me to be, the unrepeatable gift that is you? Where am I cheating that, right? Where am I holding back on that? Where am I suppressing that? Where am I robbing myself of giving the gift of myself to others, right? Because you are a gift and we need you. We need each other. We need each other because we are mirrors for each other, right? We are the mirrors and we are the ones who are inviting each other into compassion and life and love, being fully ourselves. That's what it is. 5 levels of compassion. Make sure you are offering it to yourself always. Thanks for being with us today on Spiritual Direction and Soul Care's Sunday Live. I'm so glad that we are together. Jill did such a great job last week. I know some of you have had an awesome time with her session last week, so we'll make sure that we bring her back again, and we'll have her lead us through the peace process again, maybe next week or in the coming weeks. We are continuing to grow together and discover insanely practical tools for the spiritual journey. So thanks so much for being here and have a great rest of the week.